Joining us now is Mike Davis. He is the founder and president of the Article 3 Project, here to talk about the various legal cases before former President Trump. Mr. Davis, thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Remind our viewers about the project, what it is, and also, if you could, tell us how you're funded.
Sure. I started the Article 3 Project after I left the Senate Judiciary Committee, where I served as the lead staffer for the confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh, along with a record number of President Trump's federal judges. And as we talked about in one of my prior C-SPAN interviews, the reason I started the Article 3 Project is because I saw how vicious the left was on judicial nominees. And I saw a void on the right where we needed someone with insider experience, with an outsider mindset and an outsider willingness to fight. And so that's why I started the Article 3 Project back in 2019. We've been very successful in helping President Trump support his effort to confirm Justice Amy Coney Barrett and transform the Supreme Court to the first constitutionalist majority in 90 years, along with a record number of lower court judges. We have been focusing the last 2 years on this Democrat lawfare against President Trump, his top aides, his attorneys, his January 6 supporters, parents outraged by gender chaos in schools and the resulting rapes in high school bathrooms, Christians praying outside of abortion clinics, while President Biden and the Biden Justice Department and these Democrat prosecutors give amnesty to Biden, his family, BLM, Antifa, Hamas, abortion industry activists.
Well, that's the activity, but how are you funded? Just so we can go on to other things, but how are you funded?
Yeah, we are funded by donations. You can go to article3project.org and donate online.
Because you talk about judges in the legal system, the 4 criminal cases brought against the former president, the federal election interference, the Georgia election interference, the classified documents, the hush money scheme, they're all at various stages. But to what extent would you argue about these cases and their legitimacy against the former president?
I think this is part of the Democrats' lawfare and election interference campaign against President Trump. I think that these are illegitimate cases, whether it's the 2 bogus impeachments against Trump, the 4 bogus indictments against Trump for non-crimes, several illegal, unconstitutional gag orders against Trump. I've never heard of putting a gag order on a criminal defendant. If there's anyone on the planet who needs the First Amendment right to speak out against the prosecutor, the judge, the witnesses, the process, it's a criminal defendant going through the process, unless, of course, we're North Korea, and then they don't have those rights. We also see the Democrats trying to bleed President Trump dry of financial resources during his campaign with these bogus civil lawsuits, like the civil fraud lawsuit in New York by New York Attorney General Tish James for the non-fraud of paying back a sophisticated Wall Street banks in full, on time, as agreed, with interest. This Democrat judge up there, Arthur Engeron, imposed nearly a $500 million unconstitutionally punitive fine on Trump. You see with Jean Carroll, you have the New York legislature changing the law so she can bring a lawsuit just against Trump under this law that was passed just to get Trump, and then she couldn't remember anything about the case except for she knew it was Trump, like Christine Blasey Ford, and she got nearly $100 million, another unconstitutionally punitive damages award from a Democrat judge and a Democrat jury. I would say this, that our country's not going to survive if we're going to continue these republic-ending lawfare tactics, because this is not going to end with Trump. If Democrats think that they fear American voters, and so they're just going to use their Democrat lawyers and Democrat prosecutors and Democrat judges and Democrat juries and these Democrat hellholes like New York, D.C., and Atlanta to take out the leading presidential candidate, instead of letting the American people vote on November 5th. We're not going to have a country left.
Let me roll the callers in. It's Democrats 202-748-8000 if you want to ask our guest questions. Republicans 202-748-8001, and Independents 202-748-8002. And you can text your questions or comments at 202-748-8003. Mr. Davis, the former president awaits a Supreme Court decision on if he's held about immunity. What do you think was the strength of his argument? And though nobody knows for sure, what are you expecting from the court?
I expect the court, if they actually follow precedent and the law, is the Supreme Court will establish that the President of the United States, any President of the United States, has immunity from criminal prosecution, just like federal judges do, just like members of Congress do. And that's for their official acts, not their personal acts, for their official acts. Right now, like I said, federal judges and members of Congress have both civil and criminal immunity for their official acts. The president right now just has civil immunity from a case from 40 years ago, the Nixon case from 40 years ago, where the Supreme Court established that the president is immune from civil prosecution for his official acts. The court has not yet established that the president is immune from criminal prosecution from his official acts, because we've never seen a former president indicted until these 4 unprecedented bogus indictments by these Democrat prosecutors against President Trump. And I would say, if the Supreme Court does not establish that the president is immune from criminal prosecution for his official acts, not his personal acts, you're going to see the destruction of the presidency, which will lead to the destruction of the country. And let me give you an example. We have Laken Riley's murder down in Georgia. So does that mean that when President Trump is back in office, the Trump 47 Justice Department can charge President Biden for the natural and probable consequences for his illegal mass release of dangerous, unvetted, illegal immigrants into our country who go on to rape and murder people like Laken Riley? Okay. Does that mean the Biden Justice Department can charge Biden? Do we want to go down this path?
Well, Jack Smith, in his argument for the court on immunity, said in part that the applicant's position is that he's absolutely immune from federal criminal prosecutions based on any conduct that falls within the outer perimeter of his official duties as president, unless Congress has previously impeached and convicted him for the same conduct. He went on to say that position finds no support in constitutional text, separation of powers, principles, history, or logic. You have a legal background. What do you think about the strength of that argument?
Well, I mean, I would say that Jack Smith is used to getting reversed unanimously by the Supreme Court, like he did with the bogus political prosecution of former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell. Jack Smith won a conviction. McDonnell was a likely presidential or vice presidential contender in 2016. That conviction was reversed in 2016 by the Supreme Court 8-0. It would have been 9-0, but Justice Scalia passed away, but the damage was done. Jack Smith is a political Scud missile who was sent in by Democrats to take out Republican presidential or vice presidential contenders, like he did with Bob McDonnell. I would say on the presidential immunity argument, there is precedent. There's precedent in the civil context. The standard is the president of the United States is immune from civil prosecution for his official acts or the outer perimeter of his official acts under that Nixon case we discussed from 40 years ago. So if federal judges are immune from criminal prosecution, absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for their official acts, and so are members of Congress, why wouldn't the president of the United States be criminally immune for his official acts? It would destroy our country. Another example, besides Biden and Laken Riley, is President Obama and his legal advisor at the time, now federal circuit judge David Barron on the First Circuit Court of Appeals in Boston. David Barron advised President Obama that it was lawful for Obama to order an extrajudicial drone strike on 2 American citizens, including a minor. So if Obama is not immune from criminal prosecution for his official acts, does that mean the Trump 47 Justice Department can charge President Obama and now Judge David Barron with capital murder for their illegal drone strike on 2 American citizens, including a minor? Do the Democrats really want to go down this path?
We have calls for you. This is Tim in Kentucky, Democrats line. You're on with Mike Davis. Good morning. Go ahead.
Hey, Mr. Davis, how are you doing? I see you're all talking. You're talking very fast, and there's a lag. I think you should be thrown off for spreading so much hateful propaganda. Trump belongs in jail, period. Put him in jail.
Sorry, caller. Sorry about that, but Mr. Davis, go ahead.
I would just say this to these people who hate Trump. This is so much bigger than Donald Trump. These are Republic ending tactics. And I would also say to Biden and these four Democrat prosecutors, these four Democrat prosecutions around the country trying to defeat President Trump in the courtroom and throw him in prison because they fear President Trump on November 5th, 2024. This is not how our country is supposed to run. The people who are pretending that they're saving democracy are actually destroying democracy with this unprecedented Democrat lawfare and election interference.
From New York State Republican line, Peter is up next.
Yeah, good morning. Mike, thank you for all you are doing for the former president. I really appreciate that. Wanted you to address this idea of lawfare that's going on where they're using prosecutorial discretion on who they prosecute and who they don't. Both Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden both violated the Espionage Act. Hillary Clinton by having a private server, an illegal private server, and then destroying 33,000 subpoenaed emails, and Joe Biden for stealing documents out of a SCIF for the last 40 years. Both of those violate the Espionage Act, but yet the Justice Department refuses to prosecute them, but they're prosecuting President Trump for these same offenses. I believe he will be vindicated in the long run, but this is all designed to convince the public that somehow President Trump is a criminal and somehow Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden have been vindicated. I do believe the president will be vindicated from all this, former President Trump, in the long term, but the short term is to hurt him politically.
Okay.
So if you could address that, I appreciate it.
Peter, thank you. We'll let our guest address that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this. You have President Trump, who had his presidential records in the office of former president, which is funded by Congress. It has federally funded staff. It has Secret Service protection, 24/7, 365. The staff has security clearances. It is secure office space. It is one of the most secure office spaces on the planet. President Trump used Mar-a-Lago as one of his office when he's the president of the United States. He had his presidential records in this office, and they never leaked. They never leaked the entire time that President Trump had them, and they only leaked until Joe Biden's Justice Department went to a Democrat judge, Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhart, who had just recused from Trump's civil lawsuit against Hillary Clinton 6 weeks prior because of Judge Reinhart's Facebook's post bashing Trump. Somehow that ethical issue, that recusal issue magically disappeared, and the Biden Justice Department got an illegal, unprecedented, unnecessary raid on the office of former president using the Espionage Act and not even mentioning the Presidential Records Act that controls to go get these presidential records that Trump was allowed to have.
Mr. Davis, you probably saw this happen this morning when it comes to the Georgia case, in the case of the district attorney, Fani Willis. She can stay and keep on with the case if she lets go of Nathan Wade or vice versa. What do you think about the ultimate decision from the judge?
Well, it's a clearly legally wrong decision, but it doesn't surprise me with this judge. This is a young judge appointed by Governor Brian Kemp, who is certainly a Trump hater. This judge, Scott McAfee, is like 33 or 34 years old. He worked for Brian Kemp as the Georgia State Inspector General. He worked for Fani Willis in the Fulton County DA's office. He donated $150 to Fani Willis's campaign. There is very clear evidence that Fani Willis had an illegal financial stake in this criminal prosecution of President Trump. She hired her secret, unqualified boyfriend. She paid him $250 an hour to bring an unprecedented RICO charge against President Trump and 18 co-defendants. He billed $700,000 in counting. He billed for his time to collude with the Biden White House, including the Biden White House counsel twice before this indictment. He billed 24 hours on a single day. I don't know how that's possible. And then Nathan Wade took his girlfriend slash boss, Fani Willis on these trips, these lavish trips to Napa Valley, the Caribbean, to Belize. That's bribery. Those are gift ban violations. That's an illegal financial state in a criminal prosecution, which is absolutely illegal. She should have been disqualified. The entire office should have been disqualified if this Judge McAfee followed the facts and the law as he should have. There's no question she should have been disqualified and the office should have been disqualified. Frankly, the case should have been dismissed without prejudice for a new prosecutor to come in. But now that Judge McAfee faces a Democrat challenger, a Democrat judicial election challenger for this November in this overwhelmingly Democrat county of Fulton County, and I think he caved to the political pressure. You saw at this evidentiary hearing where he let Fani Willis run the show. He was scared to look at her. He couldn't keep her under control, and I think he just caved. He's young. He's scared. He caved to Fani Willis, his former boss.
Now, he did dismiss some of those charges against the former president this week as well. He still faces the larger issues, but dismissed some of those charges.
Yeah, that was window dressing. That was political. He made it look like he was trying to be even-handed and fair by dismissing charges that really don't matter that much. And so he dismissed charges that, it looks like Nathan Wade wrote with a crayon and it's admitted because they're just so incomprehensible that they got dismissed, and they can refile those charges if Nathan Wade can get out the pen instead of the crayon and actually be a real lawyer here. But it's very obvious that this Judge Scott McAfee caved to political pressure, and that's very unfortunate.
Let's hear from Matthew. Matthew's in Georgia, independent line.
Hey, how are you guys this morning? Quick question for Mr. Davis. I'm just curious as, you're talking about cronyism and Fani Willis worked with this guy and this guy did this, and it's like all a Democratic plot or whatever. But at the same time, you're, seemingly to me, if you're working on this project, you have something to do with Mr. Trump and, his line. So how do we differentiate that between what you're talking about and separately, sorry, excuse me. Separately, as far as the legal stuff, there's been brought up a lot of precedent and stuff, and acting like this is a big smear campaign. But so, I mean, if you believe in the law, then, I mean, does the law just not, is it not important when it's a guy that you may have something to do with? Or
okay, Matthew, we'll let our guests respond to that.
That's a fair point. I'm very pro-Trump. We were instrumental in helping Trump transform the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts, the federal judiciary, to the first constitutionalist majority in 90 years, where judges are actually going to follow the law in these cases instead of make up the law and follow their political will. They're going to actually follow the law, which is a good thing. I would say this on the lawfare. Let me give you an example. Democrats thought that they were just going to disqualify Trump from the ballot based upon a post-Civil War constitutional amendment. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment passed after the Civil War to chase out of office those who engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. There is controlling case law, or not controlling, there's persuasive case law from then Chief Justice Salmon Chase from over 150 years ago, saying that if you want to disqualify under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, Congress has to pass a federal statute, which Congress did, a federal criminal statute on insurrection or rebellion with a disqualification clause. A federal prosecutor has to bring federal charges. A federal grand jury has to indict. A federal jury has to find guilt with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, unanimous guilt. A federal judge has to convict. That conviction has to be upheld on appeal on this specific criminal statute on insurrection or rebellion with a disqualification clause, right? Democrats decided that they weren't going to follow this precedent. They weren't going to follow the law. They were just going to go to Democrat judges in Democrat jurisdictions like Colorado and just have the Colorado Supreme Court in a 4-3 decision. It's all 7 of the Colorado justices are Democrats. I live in Colorado. 4 of them are pretty far left, and they just took President Trump off the ballot in Colorado, and they were going to use that precedent nationwide. The Supreme Court just reversed that 9-0. 9-0. I clerked on the Supreme Court. It is very hard to get the Supreme Court to rule 9-0 on these key contentious cases. But this Democrat lawfare and election interference is so over the top that even Justices Kagan, Sotomayor, and Jackson, not exactly Trump fans, joined in this 9-0 decision to side with President Trump. You're seeing President Biden's hands on all 4 of these unprecedented criminal prosecutions against President Trump for non-crimes. It is not a crime to object to a presidential election in America. It is allowed by the Electoral Count Act of 1887. Democrats objected to Republican wins in 1968, 2000, 2004, and 2016. We don't see John Kerry and Al Gore and Hillary Clinton in jail for objecting. And it's also allowed by the First Amendment to object to presidential elections. It's only illegal to object to a presidential election in third world Marxist hellholes like North Korea, Zimbabwe, and now Atlanta and Washington, D.C.
You talked about those 3 justices on that case, and part of their opinion, they wrote, although we agree that Colorado can't enforce Section 3, we protest the majority's effort to use the case to define the limits of federal enforcement of the provision. What do you make of that?
I think it's silly. If the Supreme Court did not have a clear, bright line, broad rule that if you want to disqualify, it has to be through legislation passed through Congress and you go through due process in the federal courts. If the Supreme Court did not actually rule, the Democrats would just we'd have to play whack-a-mole with the Democrats' bogus disqualification efforts. We saw this in Colorado with the Colorado Supreme Court. You had this Democrat Maine Secretary of State, this unelected, non-lawyer Secretary of State, Shanna Bellows, who just decreed, I feel like Trump committed an insurrection somehow on January 6th, so I'm just going to take him off the ballot. The Supreme Court understands that what the Democrats were doing, they were playing a very dangerous anti-democratic game that, pretending like they were saving democracy by destroying democracy. And the Supreme Court wanted to make sure that we don't have a train wreck before November 5th, 2024.
From Robert in Connecticut, Republican line.
Hi, Mike. Really like what you're doing, especially when you're on Rav Radio on the War Room with Steve Bannon. My question is this. Could you talk about the committee headed up by Congressman Laudermilk and his findings on the J6 committee, how President Trump did authorize troops, and how Liz Cheney would not interview witnesses that went against her narrative? Thank you very much.
So, thank you. January 6th was a lawful protest permitted by the National Park Service that devolved into a riot. People got out of control. It devolved into a riot. There is zero evidence that Trump incited this riot. To the contrary, he told his protesters to go peacefully. There's also evidence, as this caller just cited, that Trump wanted to have 10,000 National Guard troops at this January 6th protest to ensure that it did not get out of control. And the evidence is that the Democrat leadership, the Democrat D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser and the Democrat Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, did not want these so-called stormtroopers at the Capitol, right? So what the Democrats did on January 6th is they politicized this riot. They tried to pretend it was somehow an insurrection. How the hell is it an insurrection when they go unarmed to the Capitol? They follow police direction, walk through velvet ropes, get to the Senate floor, and they don't burn down the damn place. And then Trump wanted to send 10,000 National Guard troops to what? Put down his insurrection that he was supposed to be organizing? This is disgraceful what the Democrats have done with January 6th. They have fully weaponized the Biden Justice Department with the biggest law enforcement operation in our history to destroy the lives of these January 6th protesters. There are 3 categories of January 6th protesters. There are people who are there peacefully and lawfully, and even if you think they're wrong, even if you think they're crazy, they absolutely have a First Amendment right to be there. There's a second category of people who trespassed on January 6th, and they should be charged with trespassing. And then there's a third category, the people who were violent, and those people should be charged more harshly. But to lump all of those people together and say that they're insurrectionists, even though there has never been a charge of insurrection after the Democrats on the January 6th committee have spent tens of millions of dollars, and the Biden Justice Department, including Jack Smith, has spent tens of millions of dollars, and there's zero evidence of insurrection. This is defamation, what they're doing to these January 6th defendants, and to put them in prison and ruin their lives while they give amnesty to the much more dangerous and much more destructive and much more deadly BLM and Antifa and Hamas supporters, along with the abortion industry activists who have been obstructing justice by politicizing, by going outside of these Supreme Court justices' homes and threatening, intimidating them. That's obstruction of justice.
And just to show you, Mr. Davis, there were headlines leading away from January 6th about even one supporter, arrested for having a gun there, or at least shooting off a gun. So you said there were no arms present. I wanted to know if you wanted to clarify that.
Well, they found one person with a weapon. Okay, how about the BLM and Antifa supporters who attacked the White House, who burned the Secret Service guard station, who torched St. John's Church, who attacked U.S. Senator Rand Paul leaving the White House, who attacked the Portland federal courthouse on a nightly basis? How about the abortion industry activists who threatened and intimidated Supreme Court justices outside of their homes while they were deciding the Dobbs decision, which led to justices and their families being taken to a safe house? What happens even after the 1 a.m. assassination attempt against Justice Kavanaugh, his wife Ashley, and their two teenage daughters? The Biden Justice Department allowed this to continue to happen. We had people from the Justice Department. We had the White House press secretary at the time, Jen Psaki, say from the podium, the White House podium, that these protesters were protected by the First Amendment. They absolutely were not.
Okay.
It's not, you don't have a First Amendment right to obstruct justice by intimidating federal judges outside of their homes while cases are pending.
Got you there. Go on and point that out. Let's hear from George in Washington State, Democrats line. Hello.
How you doing? I just want to say that we're going to unelect Trump again in November, and then we'll hold him accountable. I don't care this guy rambling about this and that.
Mr. Davis, on the several fronts that the president's seeing delays to his trial, do you think that ultimately impacts his effort for re-election?
You broke up. I'm sorry. The delays, is that what you said?
The president's seeing some delays in when these actual trials will take place. Do you think that ultimately benefits his re-election efforts?
Well, of course. I mean, the Democrats' campaign strategy seems to be to convicting President Trump in front of one of these Democrat judges and Democrat prosecutors and Democrat juries and Democrat hellholes like New York, D.C., or Atlanta before the presidential election, because Biden and the Democrats fear American voters on November 5th, 2024. Remember that these Democrats waited 30 months to bring these unprecedented indictments against a former president, and then they tried to stack up these criminal trials back to back to back this year, right during the middle of the presidential election. They wanted President Trump in a courtroom before the election and in shackles and in prison after the election. And the American people, not these Democrat prosecutors and judges and juries, get to decide the presidential.
Vilma in Kentucky, Republican line, for Mike Davis of the Article 3 Project.
Good morning. Thank you, Mike, for taking my question. I would like to know, as far as I understand at this point, the lawsuit brought against him in New York by the very smug DA, James, he's, I think, fined over $300 million. Well, from what I understand, nobody lost any money. Nobody lost any property. And so if you could give us details on all of that. And also, so many of these Democratic politicians, they, like earlier, Kamala Harris was, we saw that clip of her. And they think if they get on a platform and give their impressive little wordy speech or so forth, that and even if it's not true, which abortion is not in the Constitution, of course not, but they just, I guess, think that we all perceive it to be that way. Well, we're not all stupid. So, no, that is not in the Constitution, if you could bring that out too.
Okay, and she was referring to something in our last segment, Mr. Davis, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just saying with the New York case, New York Attorney General Tish James brought a civil fraud case against Trump with his Democrat judge Arthur Engoron. They got nearly $500 million in this unconstitutionally punitive fine against Trump for the non-fraud of Trump paying back sophisticated Wall Street banks in full, on time, as agreed, with interest. There are no victims. The banks testified they were happy and want to continue to do business with Trump. The judge and Tish James cite to this New York law and say that they don't have to have victims, that somehow the public was victimized. But I don't know how you would have constitutional standing there if there's no victim. How do you have standing to bring an action against someone if there's not a victim?
Democrats line, Beth in Florida. Hello, you're next up.
Thank you for taking the call. It appears that Mike Davis must be suffering from some kind of paraplegia because he keeps repeating the word Democrat, always in a negative connotation. Since he's been on this show, he has said Democrat at least 200 times. It's disgusting. No one is above the law. This includes Trump. So the Republicans had the House, the Senate. They had complete control of everything. The wall was not completed. And for whatever reason, I don't know why people are thinking that Trump is magically going to come into office and do everything that he's promising that he never fulfilled in his first term. You know, I'm so sick of, I was a Republican. I'm no longer a Republican. I left the party because of him. I'm sick of the whataboutism. Well, you know, the caller before last asked Mike a direct question, or you did. You asked Mike a direct question about the person at January 6th that had the gun. And he says, well, what about Black Lives Matter? And what about, you know, Antifa?
Well, caller, let me ask you, do you want him to ask him a direct question?
Yes. So if you think that it would be prudent for them to go after Biden for the person that murdered Laken, which is a horrible tragedy, how would you feel about those kids that were separated from their parents under Trump's regime going after Trump in the future for, you know, ruining their lives?
Okay, Beth from Florida.
Well, I think you're proving my point about this lawfare being destructive to our republic. These are republic-ending tactics. Because if Democrats think that they're going to indict President Trump for his official acts, and he doesn't, like, for example, they're alleging that President Trump contemplated firing his acting attorney general. That's part of Jack Smith's January 6th indictment. That's clearly one of his official acts as the president of the United States, yet Jack Smith used that as a predicate act in his unprecedented January 6th indictment against President Trump in Washington, D.C. If Democrats think that this is just going to end when, you know, if Trump wins back the office of the president, if Democrats think he's going to turn the other cheek, they're just crazy, right? This is so destructive to our country. This is how the Roman Republic fell. This is Caesar, you know, crossing the Rubicon because he had the insiders in Rome waging lawfare. So he crossed the Rubicon from Gaul into Rome because he felt like the lawfare left him no other choice. And I'm not saying that we're going to go to a civil war in this country, not at all. What I'm saying is this lawfare is going to lead for tit for tat between the two political parties going forward, and it's going to destroy the presidency and it's going to destroy our country. And that's why the Supreme Court needs to firmly say, hopefully unanimously, but I doubt it's going to be unanimous, but I do think the Supreme Court is going to hold that the President of the United States, like members of Congress and like federal judges, are immune from criminal prosecution for their official acts, not their personal acts, their official acts.
Mr. Davis, we have about a minute left. You're associated with something called the Internet Accountability Project. And on that front, I wanted to get your thoughts on the efforts this week in Washington on TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, I think TikTok is a very destructive tool that China uses to run influence campaigns on American kids. And so I think TikTok should be banned from the CCP, China, and people associated, entities, companies associated with China should not control TikTok. I guess the question is, with this legislation, is it tailored enough where it is just focused on TikTok and its Chinese control, or are there unintended consequences with this legislation? I generally support the legislation to ban TikTok, but I think that if there are unintended consequences, I think the House and Senate should iron those out before this is passed and enacted.
This is Mike Davis of the Article 3 Project, article3project.org, the website if you want to check out his organization and its work. Mr. Davis, thank you for giving us your time.